When Michael's wife, Emma, began acting distant, he blamed work stress. But the truth unraveled in the most unexpected way, hidden behind gym doors he secretly owned. Michael had always believed in the sanctity of trust. For 7 years, he and Emma had built what looked like a stable, enviable marriage, the kind people admired from the outside. Friends would often say they were the perfect couple, bound together by love, laughter, and the routines of daily life. But lately, the routines had started to shift. Emma, who once spent her evenings curled up beside him watching shows, had suddenly developed a new obsession: her health and fitness. At first, Michael encouraged it. He admired her determination, the way she pushed herself to go to the gym after long days at work, and he saw it as a positive change. She seemed more energized, more focused, and he wanted to be supportive of her goals. But slowly, something began to gnaw at him. Emma's gym trips were becoming longer. A 1-hour workout stretched into 2, then 2 hours became 3. By the time she returned home, Michael noticed small but telling details: the faint smell of cologne that didn't belong to him, the light smudges of makeup she never wore when she exercised, and her phone, which had become practically glued to her hand. Whenever he entered the room, she would flip it face down or tuck it into her pocket. These small actions, once insignificant, started to paint a picture he couldn't ignore. At dinner, her mind seemed elsewhere. She would nod at his words, smile distractedly, and then return to scrolling through her phone as if the screen carried secrets more important than their conversation. Michael tried to dismiss it, telling himself it was just a phase or stress. He had always trusted Emma. She had been his confidant, his partner through every hardship, and the thought of her betraying that trust felt absurd. Yet every late night, she claimed, was just another intense workout session twisted inside him like a blade. One evening, Michael decided to surprise her. He knew she usually wrapped up her workout by 9, so he drove to the gym around that time, thinking it might be nice to walk her home or grab a late bite together. But when he arrived, her car was parked outside, and yet she didn't come out until well past 10:30. When she finally appeared, she wasn't breathless or sweaty like someone who had been training hard. Instead, her hair was neatly tied back, and her cheeks had a flush that didn't quite look like the result of exercise. She laughed at something on her phone as she walked to her car, completely unaware that Michael was parked a few spaces away, watching. The sight lingered in his mind long after they went to bed. Lying beside her that night, he listened to the steady rhythm of her breathing, wondering if he was overthinking, or if there was something far more sinister happening. He couldn't shake the unease. She had started coming home later and later, sometimes with flimsy excuses that didn't line up. One night it was a new yoga class. Another night she mentioned cardio drills that supposedly stretched 3 hours long. Michael wasn't naive. He knew workouts didn't last that long unless there was another reason to stay. The next day he casually asked her about her routine. "So, how's training going? You're spending a lot of time there." Emma smiled, but it was forced, and he could see the hesitation behind her eyes. She said her trainer, Jake, was pushing her harder than ever, that he wanted her to unlock her full potential. Michael nodded, keeping his expression calm, though the name stuck in his head. Jake. She had never mentioned him before, at least not with that much enthusiasm. And now she spoke about him like he was central to every session, every improvement she was making. The way her lips curved when she said his name didn't escape Michael. From then on, the patterns became sharper, clearer. Whenever she got a message, her lips twitched into a smile that wasn't for Michael. When he asked simple questions, her answers were clipped, as if he was intruding on thoughts she wished to keep private. He noticed how she dressed differently for the gym, wearing fitted outfits she had never bothered with before, applying a touch of perfume before leaving the house, something she never did when going to sweat it out. These were subtle changes, but to Michael, they screamed louder than words. He found himself torn between confronting her and pretending not to notice. A part of him wanted to believe it was innocent, that perhaps she was just happy with the progress she was making, or that she had simply found a new spark of life through fitness. But deep down, in the corners of his mind where denial couldn't reach, he felt the truth inching closer. Emma was slipping away from him, and it had something to do with her so-called trainer. One evening, while folding laundry, Michael noticed her gym clothes smelled faintly of cologne again. Not hers, not his. He pressed the fabric closer, inhaling, and felt his stomach tighten. The evidence was stacking against her, piece by piece, detail by detail. It wasn't a wild suspicion anymore. It was becoming a painful reality he couldn't escape. Michael told himself he needed to be patient, to watch carefully, to collect the signs before acting. But each day that passed made it harder to hide his suspicions. He saw Emma slipping through his fingers, not because she was physically distant, but because emotionally, she was already elsewhere. Emma had always been the type of woman who sought comfort in routines, but with Jake, her so-called trainer, she discovered something that unsettled her marriage without her even realizing how far she was drifting. Jake wasn't just a fitness instructor. He was charming in a way that seemed effortless. He carried himself with a confidence that drew people in, and his easy smile had a way of making Emma feel seen at a time when she thought Michael barely noticed the small changes in her life. It began innocently, with casual encouragement during her workouts, but soon their interactions stretched far beyond exercise. At first, Emma enjoyed how attentive Jake was. He praised her form, noticed her effort, and remembered the small details she mentioned in passing. If she complained about a long day at work, he would check in on her the next session, asking if things had gotten better. These moments felt refreshing, as though someone was actually listening. Michael, buried in his own responsibilities, had stopped asking her how her day went with that same spark of curiosity he once had. With Jake, she didn't have to fight for attention. It was freely given, and that alone drew her closer. Her workouts became less about fitness and more about the conversations that came with them. She looked forward to seeing Jake's familiar grin when she walked into the gym. The way he adjusted her posture with a guiding hand made her pulse quicken, though she pretended it was just part of training. When he lingered just a little too close, she didn't pull away. Instead, she found herself craving it. Emma began to lose track of time, not realizing how much longer her session stretched simply because she didn't want to leave. It didn't take long before Jake started sliding into her messages outside the gym. At first it was harmless, tips about nutrition, reminders to stay hydrated, small motivational notes, but soon those texts turned personal. He asked her what she liked to do outside of working out, if she had favorite restaurants, what music she listened to. He complimented her in ways Michael hadn't in years, telling her she had a glow about her, that she was stronger than she gave herself credit for, that she deserved more recognition than she received. Emma knew she should have shut it down, that a professional boundary was being crossed, but the flattery was intoxicating. She told herself it was harmless, that it was just a friendship. Emma began dressing differently for the gym, taking more time in front of the mirror before leaving. She tried on outfits that accentuated her figure, ones that drew Jake's eyes and made her feel desirable again. She sprayed a touch of perfume, not for the workout itself, but for the moments in between when Jake would lean closer, his voice low and playful, his compliments slipping out naturally. Every second of his attention filled a void she hadn't even realized had grown so large in her marriage. The guilt was there, of course, pressing in at the edges of her conscience. When Michael asked about her training, she spoke lightly, downplaying the details, keeping Jake's name as just that, a trainer, nothing more. But when she mentioned him, she couldn't hide the spark in her eyes, the involuntary excitement that crept into her tone. Michael's subtle questions didn't alarm her at first. She assumed he was just being polite. She never considered that he was noticing the way she lit up when she spoke about another man. Jake, sensing her openness, began to push further. He would end sessions with lingering looks, his compliments growing bolder. One evening, after a particularly intense workout, he told her she was more than just a client to him. Emma froze for a moment, torn between the sudden rush of exhilaration and the shadow of betrayal. Yet instead of stopping it, she let the words sink in, let them fuel the fire she was already nurturing inside. She convinced herself she deserved this attention, that after years of feeling overlooked, she was entitled to it. Their conversations deepened, drifting into confessions about their lives. Emma spoke of her frustrations, the loneliness she sometimes felt even when sitting across from Michael at dinner. Jake listened without judgment, nodding, occasionally reaching out to squeeze her hand in a gesture that felt intimate, dangerous. She knew she was walking a fine line, but every step she took made it harder to turn back. What started as casual banter had evolved into an emotional connection she hadn't expected, and with each late night at the gym, she leaned into it more. Emma told herself it was still under control. She hadn't crossed any obvious line yet, not physically, though in her heart she knew emotional infidelity carried its own weight. Still, the pull was undeniable. She began rearranging her schedule, carving out more time for sessions that weren't even necessary, making excuses to see Jake outside the structured routines of training. She didn't admit it aloud, but the gym had become less about her body and more about the thrill of being wanted again. The bond they were forming was becoming impossible to ignore. Yet Emma hid it behind the facade of fitness and self-improvement. To Michael, she was just a wife dedicated to her health, pushing herself for the sake of discipline. But in truth, every bead of sweat, every stretch, every moment spent in that space was intertwined with Jake's presence, with the feeling she was too afraid to name, but too enthralled to resist. Michael had always been deliberate in how he managed his business affairs. While most people assumed he worked long hours in finance, very few knew he had quietly invested in several ventures on the side. The gym Emma attended was one of them, though he never advertised his involvement. It had started as a business opportunity, something he believed would grow steadily with the rising trend of health and wellness. He deliberately kept his ownership discreet, operating through partners and managers who ran the day-to-day while his name stayed buried in the paperwork. To Emma, it was just another fitness center in town, a place she stumbled upon when she claimed she wanted to change her lifestyle. She had no idea the polished machines, mirrored walls, and trainers were all working under the umbrella of her husband's hidden investment. Michael had his reasons for keeping it a secret. He liked having a layer of privacy, a separation between his home life and his business dealings. There was a kind of satisfaction in knowing he could observe things without anyone realizing he was connected. It gave him an advantage, a sense of control that extended beyond the ordinary. Yet, he never once imagined that this hidden ownership would collide with his personal life in such a brutal way. Each time Emma left for the gym, Michael would watch her from the doorway, offering a casual goodbye. Inside, he carried the strange irony that she was walking into a space he controlled but where she believed she was free of his reach. That unspoken truth gnawed at him, especially as her behavior became increasingly suspicious. He began to realize that what had once been a simple business decision was now the very stage for his unfolding doubts. On the days he reviewed reports from the gym, he noticed her name pop up in scheduling logs, frequent check-ins, and extended time blocks. At first, it seemed normal. Clients often grew dedicated and consistent. But when Emma's sessions started appearing at unusual hours, booked almost exclusively with the same trainer, Jake, Michael felt the familiar weight of unease. The reports didn't lie. The patterns were there in black and white. She was spending far more time at the gym than she ever admitted. The irony of it burned him. She was sneaking around under the belief that the gym was just another anonymous place, yet it was his. The floors she walked on, the contracts signed by every trainer, the schedules filed into the system, they all belonged to him. He could see her movements without her ever knowing. What should have felt like a position of power instead felt like a dagger twisting in his chest. Every piece of information only deepened the suspicion he had tried so hard to suppress. Michael found himself sitting in his office late at night, staring at the glowing computer screen with her check-in times glaring back at him. His fingers hovered over the mouse, debating whether to dig deeper. He had access to everything: camera feeds, trainer evaluations, employee notes. But part of him resisted. To look would mean acknowledging the possibility that his wife was entangled in something unforgivable. Still, curiosity and dread worked hand in hand, dragging him closer to the truth. He began asking subtle questions to the gym manager, careful not to arouse suspicion. "How's the staff doing? How's Jake handling clients? Is he reliable?" Each answer came back with praise. Jake was attentive, professional, clients liked him. The kind of glowing feedback that only twisted the knife further. Michael couldn't reveal why he was asking. He had to maintain the mask of a distant investor. But behind that mask, every word felt personal. When he finally pulled up the security footage, his chest tightened. He told himself it was only to ease his mind, to put his suspicions to rest. Yet what he saw didn't calm him. It fueled the storm inside. The way Emma lingered by Jake's side, the casual touches that lasted longer than necessary, the smiles exchanged when they thought no one was watching. He sat in silence, staring at the screen, his heart pounding as though the betrayal was unfolding in real time before his eyes. The cruelest part was knowing she believed she was safe in her secrecy. Emma thought she had crafted a perfect cover story, hiding behind gym sessions and the shield of fitness to justify her absences. She didn't know that every step she took there, every interaction, every extended session was documented within the very walls her husband had built. Michael felt trapped in a cruel paradox. His hidden ownership gave him access to the truth, but it also chained him to a pain he couldn't easily confront. At home, he said nothing. He studied her carefully, listening to the excuses, the explanations, the little lies sprinkled between casual conversations. Emma had no idea that the ground she was standing on was already crumbling beneath her, that Michael was piecing together the puzzle she thought she had scattered too far for him to notice. He kept his silence, not out of weakness, but out of strategy. The gym was his, the stage was set, and every move she made was under his unseen eye. Each day that passed, Michael's internal battle grew sharper. The secrecy of his ownership had once been a tool, a business tactic. Now it was a weapon, one that could expose everything in a single moment. He could confront her with undeniable proof, shatter the illusion she believed she had built. Yet he hesitated, torn between rage and heartbreak, between the urge to strike and the fear of what the aftermath might hold. Michael had grown used to sifting through the gym's reports late at night, his eyes scanning check-in logs and staff notes like a detective searching for clues. But it was during one of these routine reviews that everything shifted. At first, it seemed like any other night. He sat in his office, coffee cooling beside him, the quiet hum of the computer filling the silence. He clicked through the digital logs without much thought, until one small detail caught his attention. Emma had booked a private after-hours session with Jake. It was a note tucked neatly into the system, seemingly harmless to anyone else, but to Michael, it felt like a lightning bolt. Private sessions were normal enough, especially for committed clients. But after hours? That wasn't standard. The gym had rules, strict operating hours. If a trainer was scheduling sessions outside of that, it was either breaking policy or bending it for reasons beyond fitness. Michael leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning, the cursor hovering over the entry. He knew he had to see for himself. The next evening, he drove to the gym earlier than Emma expected, parking his car in the far corner of the lot where the shadows swallowed him. He sat in silence, his grip tightening on the steering wheel as he watched the front entrance. At 9 o'clock, the last of the regular clients filed out. The lights inside dimmed, leaving the place in a half-lit glow that made it seem almost secretive. Then, a little after 9:30, he saw her, Emma, walking in with her gym bag slung casually over her shoulder. She moved quickly, as though she didn't want anyone to notice her arrival. Michael's chest tightened. He waited another 10 minutes before slipping out of the car. He knew the side entrances well. After all, he had inspected the building himself during the renovations. The door at the back, the one trainers used for deliveries and staff access, still had the key code he'd personally chosen years ago. With a steady hand, he punched it in, the soft click of the lock echoing louder in his ears than it should have. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of disinfectant and rubber mats. Every sound, the hum of the ventilation, the faint thud of music playing from a phone speaker, felt amplified in the stillness. Michael moved carefully down the hallway, each step calculated, his heart hammering harder the closer he got to the main floor. He paused by the edge of the weight room, hidden in the shadows where the light didn't quite reach. What he saw drained the air from his lungs. Emma was there, standing by the mirrors with Jake at her side. But they weren't training. She wasn't holding weights or following instructions. Instead, they were laughing quietly, her hand brushing against his arm in a way that made Michael's stomach twist. Jake leaned in closer, saying something that made her throw her head back and laugh, a laugh Michael hadn't heard directed at him in months. The casual intimacy of the moment said more than words ever could. He stayed frozen, gripping the wall to steady himself as he watched. Emma shifted closer, her body language betraying a comfort that went far beyond professionalism. Jake placed his hand on her lower back, guiding her toward one of the benches. It was subtle, but to Michael it was glaring. He didn't need them to cross any obvious line to understand what was happening. The connection was already there, blatant and raw. Michael's mind raced, torn between stepping out and revealing himself or staying hidden and collecting the truth piece by piece. His breath felt heavy, loud in the quiet space, and he feared they might hear it. Every second stretched unbearably long as he watched his wife lean into another man, the betrayal unfolding in plain sight. He had imagined scenarios before, conjured up images of what might be going on, but reality struck harder than any suspicion ever had. There was something devastating about seeing it with his own eyes, about witnessing the small, intimate gestures that screamed of betrayal louder than any confession could. He felt anger, yes, but also a deep hollowness, like something had been ripped from his chest and left gaping. Michael backed away slowly, retreating into the hallway before they could notice him. His legs felt unsteady, his body heavy with the weight of what he'd just seen. He slipped out the side door, the night air hitting him like a slap. Sitting back in his car, He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. He stared at the gym's glowing sign, the building that had once been just a business venture but now stood as the stage for his wife's betrayal. The ride home was a blur. He replayed every second of what he had seen. The laughter, the touches, the way she looked at Jake as if he were someone who mattered more than the husband waiting at home. The image burned into his mind, refusing to leave, each detail sharper than the last. He had uncovered the truth not through guesswork or suspicion, but through undeniable evidence laid out before him during a routine check that turned into something far more devastating. Betrayal has a strange way of reshaping how a person sees the world. For Michael, the weight of it pressed down on him in ways he hadn't anticipated. After seeing Emma with Jake, the quiet moments in their home no longer felt the same. The laughter they once shared over dinner was gone, replaced by silence so sharp it seemed to slice through the air. Every glance, every casual word, every excuse she made carried a double meaning now. He found himself studying her face when she spoke, searching for traces of guilt, for some sign that she knew he had seen enough to unravel everything. The hardest part wasn't just the physical evidence of her betrayal. It was the realization of how easily she had slipped into it. Emma had been the woman who once clung to his arm at social events, the woman who spoke about dreams of building a life together. And now, she was the woman who smiled for another man in a gym Michael himself had built. That knowledge cut deeper than anything else. It wasn't only the act of infidelity, it was the audacity of doing it in a place tied so closely to him, a place she never realized was his. At night, Michael lay awake listening to the rhythm of her breathing, wondering how she could sleep so peacefully with such secrets lying between them. The bed felt colder, emptier, even when she was right there beside him. He couldn't help but think of her laughter with Jake, of the light in her eyes that had dimmed in their marriage but suddenly reignited for someone else. It wasn't just an affair. It was a transfer of the very affection that once belonged to him. He noticed the subtle changes more sharply now, the way she lingered in the mirror before leaving, the way her phone never left her side, the small smirk she couldn't hide when a message buzzed across the screen. Each detail piled onto the next, a mountain of evidence that made denial impossible. Yet she acted as though everything was normal, as though she could carry on in their home without realizing he was slowly unraveling under the truth he carried alone. The betrayal didn't just wound his pride, it cracked something in his soul. Michael had always prided himself on being steady, the kind of man who built foundations and kept his promises. He believed in loyalty, in commitment, in weathering storms together. But Emma had taken that belief and twisted it into something fragile, something laughable. He began to question himself, wondering if he had missed signs earlier, if his trust had made him blind. The questions plagued him, circling endlessly with no answers, only more pain. It became difficult for him to look at her without feeling that sting of bitterness. When she asked about his day, he gave short, clipped answers. When she leaned in for a kiss, he hesitated just a fraction too long, enough for the space between them to grow wider. Emma didn't press him about it, or if she noticed, she chose to ignore it. That ignorance fueled his anger even more. How could she not see the damage she was causing? Or was she so consumed by Jake that she didn't care? The cruelest part of the betrayal was the realization that Emma's actions weren't a moment of weakness. They were choices, repeated and deliberate, carried out night after night under the guise of self-improvement and dedication. She had chosen to give her time, her laughter, her energy to someone else while leaving him with scraps. That knowledge poisoned even the good memories they once shared. Looking back at old photos or recalling their early years together, Michael no longer saw love. He saw the seeds of a lie that would eventually bloom into this moment. He tried to bury himself in work, to distract his mind with numbers and meetings, but even there the shadows followed him. Every time he passed by the gym on the way to the office, the building seemed to mock him. The place that once represented opportunity and success now stood as a monument to betrayal. It was his, yet it had become the backdrop for his wife's disloyalty. The irony gnawed at him, twisting his stomach into knots. There were moments when anger burned hot in his chest, when he imagined storming into the gym and ripping away their illusion of secrecy. He pictured the shock on Emma's face, the stammered excuses, the sudden collapse of the lies she thought were hidden. But the anger always gave way to something heavier, heartbreak. Because beneath the fury was a man who still loved her, who still remembered the softness of her touch, the sound of her laughter before everything soured. That contradiction left him torn apart, unable to decide whether he wanted to destroy her with the truth or beg her to remember who they used to be. In the quiet moments, the weight of betrayal pressed hardest. Standing in the kitchen making coffee, he'd think of her sipping wine with Jake after their so-called training. Driving home from work, he imagined her stealing moments in the gym's corners where cameras couldn't see. Every part of his day was touched by the shadow of what she was doing. It was no longer just suspicion. It was knowledge, undeniable and crushing, and it altered the way he saw everything around him. Michael knew trust was something that, once broken, could never be fully repaired. And Emma had not only broken it, she had shattered it into pieces sharp enough to cut every time he thought about them. The betrayal wasn't just an act committed behind closed doors. It was a wound carried into their home, into their conversations, into the very fabric of their marriage. And with each passing day, the wound grew deeper, refusing to heal, reminding him constantly of what she had done and what she had chosen to give away to someone else. Michael knew he couldn't carry the weight of silence forever. The evidence was too clear, the betrayal too sharp to ignore. Night after night, he replayed the same scenes in his mind. Emma's laughter echoing in the gym, the way she leaned into Jake, the stolen moments that belonged to another man. Each memory was like gasoline on a fire he couldn't put out. But what haunted him more than the affair itself was the arrogance of her secrecy. She had walked into his world, into a space he had built with his own hands, and believed she could hide her betrayal there without consequence. He planned the confrontation carefully, not out of pettiness but out of a need for control. If Emma thought she was orchestrating this double life in the shadows, he would drag it into the light on his terms. He watched her for days, biding his time, waiting for the right moment when the truth could be unveiled in a way she could never spin or escape. He studied her patterns, when she left, when she returned, how often she carried that secret smile on her face as if it belonged to someone else. On the evening he chose, Michael made sure everything was in place. Emma thought she was heading to another late-night training session. She dressed carefully, applying that faint perfume she reserved only for the gym, not realizing that every spritz screamed of betrayal. Michael followed her, his car blending into the night as he stayed several blocks behind. By the time she slipped into the gym, he was already there, using his access to move through the back entrance. The walls that had concealed her lies were now allies in his plan. He positioned himself where he couldn't be missed, no longer a shadow watching from the edges but a presence that demanded acknowledgement. When Emma turned and saw him standing there, the color drained from her face. For the first time the mask slipped. Her lips parted as if to speak but no words came out. Jake froze, his confident demeanor crumbling under the weight of Michael's silent gaze. The atmosphere thickened, the silence more suffocating than any shouting could have been. Michael didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His calmness carried more power than rage ever could. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, letting the silence stretch long enough for her to feel the gravity of her choices. Then, with measured words, he revealed what she had never considered. That the gym she treated as her secret playground was his. That every laugh, every touch, every stolen hour unfolded on ground he owned. The shock on her face was undeniable. The safety she had felt in her deception evaporated in an instant. She realized too late that she hadn't been hiding at all. She had been exposing herself in the most humiliating way possible, never knowing her husband had been watching all along. The betrayal she thought she had buried was now laid bare in the very place she had believed was untouchable. Emma tried to speak, to string together excuses, but her words faltered against the weight of the truth. Jake shifted uncomfortably, his role in the charade exposed, his confidence shattered. Michael let them flounder in the silence, every second of it pressing down like judgment they couldn't escape. He didn't need to ask why. He didn't need explanations. The truth was there in her trembling hands, in her downcast eyes, in the guilt she could no longer conceal. For Michael, the confrontation wasn't about demanding apologies. It wasn't about salvaging something that had already been destroyed. It was about reclaiming his own power, about making Emma understand that her betrayal had never been hidden, that she had underestimated him and the life they had built together. He had given her trust, loyalty, and love, and she had repaid him with deceit on his own ground. As Emma stood before him, stripped of her lies, Michael realized the damage was irreversible. The marriage they had once shared was no longer just fractured, it was gone, replaced by the hollow remnants of what betrayal leaves behind. The confrontation was not a conversation but a reckoning, a moment where all illusions collapsed, leaving only the raw, undeniable truth between them.